Marcus Thornfield had served the kingdom of Aldoria for 15 years, his loyalty to the crown unwavering through 3 different monarchs. At 38, he was considered one of the most trusted guards in the royal palace. His stern face and piercing blue eyes a familiar sight in the marble corridors. He had seen secrets come and go, witnessed political intrigue, and kept silent about matters that could topple governments. But nothing had prepared him for what he would discover about Queen Consort Isabel Montclair. The morning started like any other in the grand palace of Valdoria. Marcus walked his usual route through the east wing, his polished boots echoing against the ancient stone floors. The palace had stood for over 4 centuries, its walls holding the weight of countless royal secrets. Tapestries depicting the great victories of Valdorian kings hung from every wall, their golden threads catching the early sunlight that streamed through tall, arched windows. Queen Isabel had married King Edmund 3 years ago in what the kingdom celebrated as a love match. She was beautiful, with auburn hair that cascaded down her shoulders and green eyes that seemed to sparkle with genuine warmth. The people adored her for her charitable work, her grace during public appearances, and the way she seemed to bring joy back to King Edmund after the tragic death of his first wife, Queen Catherine. Marcus had always found the queen consort to be polite but distant. She would nod acknowledgement when their paths crossed, but unlike the late Queen Catherine, who had known every guard's name and asked about their families, Isabel maintained a careful distance. He attributed this to her foreign upbringing. She had come from the neighboring kingdom of Rosehaven as part of a diplomatic alliance. On this particular morning, Marcus was assigned to the night watch rotation, which meant patrolling the palace grounds during the quiet hours when most of the royal family slept. It was during these hours that he often encountered the most unusual situations: sleepwalking nobles, secret romantic meetings between courtiers, and, occasionally, suspicious activities that required investigation. As he rounded the corner near the queen consort's private chambers, Marcus heard something that made him pause. It was the sound of hushed voices coming from a room that should have been empty. The room in question was an old storage area that had been converted into a small library, rarely used except by scholars researching the kingdom's history. The voices were too low to understand the words, but there was an urgency to them that caught his attention. Marcus approached carefully, his hand instinctively moving to the sword at his side. As he got closer, he could make out 2 distinct voices. One belonged to Queen Isabel, but the other was unfamiliar. This was strange because the Queen's schedule showed no appointments for this evening, and all visitors to the royal chambers were required to be logged and escorted by guards. Through a crack in the heavy wooden door, Marcus could see the queen consort seated at a small writing desk, her usually perfect hair disheveled and her elegant nightgown replaced by simple traveling clothes. Across from her sat a man Marcus had never seen before, middle-aged, with graying hair and clothes that suggested he was from outside the palace, possibly even outside the kingdom. The man was speaking in a language Marcus didn't recognize, though it sounded similar to the dialect spoken in the mountain regions beyond Valdoria's borders. Queen Isabel responded in the same language, her voice carrying a tone of frustration and what sounded like fear. This was puzzling because the queen had always claimed to speak only Valdorian and the common tongue of Rosehaven. Marcus strained to hear more, positioning himself where he could observe without being detected. The man handed Queen Isabel a small scroll, which she read quickly before her face went pale. She said something sharp in response, and the man's expression grew stern. He pointed to something on the scroll and spoke more forcefully. The queen stood abruptly, moving to a wooden chest in the corner of the room. Marcus watched as she produced a small leather pouch, the kind typically used to store precious gems or gold coins. She counted out what appeared to be several pieces of jewelry into the man's waiting hands. Even from his hidden vantage point, Marcus could see that these were not ordinary trinkets, but valuable pieces that he recognized from state occasions. The exchange troubled Marcus deeply. Why would the queen consort be meeting secretly with an unknown man? Why was she giving away royal jewelry? And why were they speaking a language she had never admitted to knowing? His duty as a royal guard was to protect the royal family, but it was also to protect the kingdom from any threats, even those that might come from within the palace walls. As the meeting continued, Marcus noticed something else disturbing. The man produced what appeared to be official documents. Seals and signatures were visible even from Marcus's position. Queen Isabel examined these carefully, and her hands were trembling as she read. Whatever these documents contained, they clearly upset her greatly. The conversation grew more heated, with both parties speaking more loudly despite their obvious attempts to remain quiet. Marcus caught a few words in the common tongue: dangerous, discovery, and, most troubling of all, the king must never know. This last phrase sent a chill down Marcus's spine. What was the queen hiding from her husband, the man she claimed to love? The meeting concluded abruptly when the man stood and gathered his materials. He said something that sounded like a warning or threat, based on his tone, and Queen Isabel's response was barely a whisper. She looked defeated, her shoulders slumped as if carrying an enormous weight. Marcus quickly retreated to a safe distance as the man prepared to leave. He watched as Queen Isabel led the stranger through a passage that connected to the palace's older sections, areas that were rarely used and not regularly patrolled. This route would allow someone to enter or exit the palace without being seen by most of the guard staff. After both figures disappeared, Marcus remained hidden for several more minutes, his mind racing with questions. Everything he had witnessed suggested that Queen Isabel was involved in some form of deception or possibly even treachery. The secret meeting, the unfamiliar language, the exchange of valuable items, and the obvious emotional distress all pointed to something far more serious than a simple misunderstanding. As he resumed his patrol, Marcus felt the weight of his discovery pressing down on him. His loyalty to the crown demanded that he report anything suspicious, but accusing the queen consort of wrongdoing without concrete evidence could be seen as treason. If he was wrong, his career and possibly his life would be forfeit. If he was right, the implication for the kingdom could be catastrophic. The rest of his shift passed slowly, with Marcus replaying every detail of what he had witnessed. By dawn, he had made a decision that would change everything. He would investigate further before taking any action. He needed to understand what Queen Isabel was hiding and whether it posed a threat to King Edmund or the kingdom. As the morning light filled the palace corridors and the daily routines began, Marcus looked different to those who knew him well. His usual confident demeanor was replaced by something more cautious, more watchful. He had stumbled upon a secret that could shake the very foundations of the monarchy, and he knew that his next steps would determine not only his own fate, but possibly the fate of the entire kingdom. The loyal guard who had started his shift with absolute faith in the royal family now found himself questioning everything he thought he knew. Queen Isabel's secret was just the beginning of a mystery that would test his loyalty, his courage, and his understanding of what it truly meant to serve the crown. The following week passed like a blur for Marcus Thornfield. Every interaction with Queen Isabel became a careful study and observation. He watched her during state dinners, noting how she would sometimes pause mid-conversation when certain topics arose. He observed her during public appearances, seeing how her smile would falter for just a moment when people spoke of her homeland of Rosehaven. Marcus had begun his own quiet investigation, starting with the palace's extensive records. The royal library contained detailed documentation of all diplomatic marriages, trade agreements, and political alliances. What he discovered about Queen Isabel's background started to paint a troubling picture. According to official records, Isabel Montclair was the daughter of Duke Aldrich Montclair of Rosehaven, a minor noble who had gained prominence through successful trade negotiations. She had been educated in the finest schools and spoke multiple languages, yet the language Marcus had heard her use was not among those listed in her official biography. More concerning was what Marcus found when he researched the recent history between Valdoria and its neighboring kingdoms. Rosehaven had been involved in several territorial disputes with Valdoria over the past decade, particularly regarding mining rights in the mountains that bordered both kingdoms. These mountains were rich in rare minerals that were essential for Valdoria's economy and military strength. During his research, Marcus came across an interesting detail in a diplomatic report from 2 years ago, just 1 year before Queen Isabel's marriage to King Edmund. The report mentioned increased activity from mountain folk who lived in the disputed territories. These people had their own distinct culture and language, and they had historically been hostile to Valdorian expansion into their lands. The language Marcus had heard Queen Isabel speak bore similarities to descriptions of the mountain dialect mentioned in these reports. This connection made his stomach turn. If the queen consort was somehow connected to these mountain people, her marriage to King Edmund could be part of a larger plan to gain access to Valdorian secrets. Marcus decided he needed to observe Queen Isabel more closely. He volunteered for additional shifts and requested assignments that would place him near her quarters and meeting rooms. His reputation as a reliable guard made these requests easy to approve, and soon he found himself with unprecedented access to observe the Queen's daily routines. What he saw over the next several days confirmed his worst fears. Queen Isabel was indeed meeting regularly with unknown individuals, always in secret, and always in parts of the palace that were not under constant surveillance. The meetings followed a pattern. They occurred during times when King Edmund was occupied with state business. They lasted no more than an hour, and they always involved the exchange of items or documents. During one such meeting, Marcus managed to get close enough to hear more of the conversation. This time, the Queen was meeting with a woman who appeared to be from the mountain regions based on her clothing and physical features. The woman spoke in the same unfamiliar language Marcus had heard before, and Queen Isabel responded fluently. From what Marcus could understand, they were discussing something called the arrangement and making references to when the time comes. The woman handed Queen Isabel a small wooden box, which the Queen examined carefully before nodding and placing it in a hidden compartment of her desk. After the woman left, Marcus watched as Queen Isabel remained alone in the room for several minutes, her head in her hands. She appeared to be crying, and when she finally looked up, her face showed a mixture of anguish and determination that Marcus had never seen before. Whatever she was involved in, it was clearly causing her significant emotional distress. The next breakthrough in Marcus's investigation came from an unexpected source. Thomas Hartwell, the palace's head librarian, was an elderly man who had served the royal family for over 40 years. He knew every book, scroll, and document in the vast royal collection, and he had an excellent memory for historical details. Marcus approached Thomas with a casual question about the mountain regions and their inhabitants. Thomas was eager to share his knowledge, explaining that the mountain people had their own complex political structure and had never fully submitted to any neighboring kingdom's authority. They were known for their fierce independence and their sophisticated network of intelligence gathering. Interesting people, Thomas said, adjusting his spectacles. They've survived for centuries by knowing everything that happens in the surrounding kingdoms. Some say they have agents everywhere, in courts, in merchant guilds, even in royal households. Of course, that's probably just rumors and old wives' tales. Marcus felt a chill at these words. If Thomas was right, then Queen Isabel might not just be secretly communicating with the mountain people. She might actually be working for them as an agent within the Valdorian royal family. That evening, Marcus made a decision that went against every protocol he had been trained to follow. He decided to search Queen Isabel's private chambers during a time when he knew she would be away. The risk was enormous. If caught, he would be executed for violating the sanctity of the royal quarters. But the potential threat to King Edmund and the kingdom seemed to outweigh the personal risk. The opportunity came during a grand feast celebrating the harvest season. All members of the royal family were required to attend the 4-hour ceremony, which would give Marcus sufficient time to conduct a thorough search. He waited until the feast was well underway before making his move. Queen Isabel's chambers were elegant and tastefully decorated, reflecting her refined upbringing and her position as queen consort. Marcus began his search methodically, looking for anything that might confirm his suspicions. He checked obvious places first, desks, wardrobes, jewelry boxes, but found nothing unusual. It was when he examined the hidden compartment he had seen Queen Isabel use during her secret meeting that Marcus discovered the evidence he had been seeking. Inside the compartment were several items that painted a damning picture of the Queen's true allegiances. First was a collection of letters written in the mountain dialect. Marcus couldn't read them, but the official seals and formal presentation suggested they were important communications. Second was a detailed map of Valdoria's military fortifications, including several that were classified as state secrets. Third, and most disturbing of all, was a small journal written in Queen Isabel's hand that contained what appeared to be detailed observations about King Edmund's habits, schedules, and private thoughts. The journal entries revealed a cold, calculating intelligence that was completely at odds with the warm, loving wife that Queen Isabel appeared to be in public. She had been systematically documenting the king's weaknesses, his political views, his military strategies, and even his personal relationships with other nobles. One entry in particular made Marcus's blood run cold. Edmund trusts me completely now. He shares everything: military plans, economic policies, even his doubts about certain nobles' loyalty. He has no idea that everything he tells me is being reported back to the Council of Peaks. The Mountain Lords are pleased with the intelligence I provided, especially regarding the new mining operations. When the time comes for action, we will know exactly how to strike. Marcus realized he was looking at evidence of the most sophisticated espionage operation in Valdorian history. Queen Isabel was not just a spy. She was the key component of a long-term plan to infiltrate and ultimately betray the kingdom from within. Her marriage to King Edmund was not a love match or even a political alliance between equals. It was a carefully orchestrated deception designed to place an enemy agent at the very heart of Valdoria's power structure. The implications were staggering. Every state secret that King Edmund had shared with his wife had been compromised. Every military strategy, every economic plan, every diplomatic negotiation had potentially been reported to Valdoria's enemies. The kingdom's security had been breached at the highest possible level. As Marcus carefully replaced the items in their hiding place, his hands were shaking. He now had definitive proof of Queen Isabel's treachery, but he also realized that his own position had become extremely precarious. If Queen Isabel suspected that her secret had been discovered, she might accelerate whatever plan she was working toward. Worse, she might attempt to eliminate anyone who posed a threat to her operation. Marcus left the Queen's chambers as quietly as he had entered, but he was no longer the same man who had begun this investigation. He now carried the weight of a terrible secret and the responsibility of deciding how to act on the evidence he had gathered. The loyal guard had become something he never wanted to be, the only person standing between his king and a betrayal that could destroy the kingdom. As he returned to his post, Marcus knew that the next phase of this crisis would require more than just observation and investigation. Soon, he would have to choose between his duty to report what he had discovered and his fear of the chaos that such a revelation might unleash. The fate of King Edmund, the stability of the realm, and Marcus's own life now 2 days after his discovery in Queen Isabel's chambers, Marcus Thornfield found himself in an impossible position. The evidence of her treachery was undeniable, but the question of how to proceed consumed his every waking moment. He watched as King Edmund interacted lovingly with his wife, completely unaware that the woman he trusted above all others was systematically betraying him and their kingdom. The weight of this knowledge began to affect Marcus's performance. His fellow guards noticed his distraction, his loss of appetite, and the dark circles under his eyes. Captain Reynolds, the head of the Royal Guard, approached him during the evening shift change. "Thornfield, you look like death warmed over," Reynolds said, his gruff voice carrying genuine concern. "What's eating at you? Family problems? Money troubles? Whatever it is, you need to sort it out. The royal family depends on us being at our best." Marcus wanted desperately to confide in his captain, but the magnitude of what he had discovered made that impossible. How could he explain that the queen consort, beloved by the people and trusted completely by the king, was an enemy agent? Who would believe such an incredible accusation? More importantly, who could be trusted with such dangerous information? "Just tired, Captain," Marcus replied, forcing his voice to remain steady. "I'll be fine." Reynolds studied his face for a long moment before nodding. "See that you are." The king has announced that Queen Isabel will be accompanying him to the military review next week. Security will be tight, and I need every man sharp and focused. This news hit Marcus like a physical blow. The military review was an annual event where King Edmund inspected the kingdom's armed forces and discussed strategic plans with his generals. If Queen Isabel was planning some form of betrayal, this event would provide her with access to the most sensitive military information imaginable. That night, Marcus made another dangerous decision. He returned to the hidden compartment in Queen Isabel's chambers, this time to see if any new communications had arrived. What he found there confirmed his worst fears and revealed an even more sinister truth than he had imagined. A new letter had been added to the collection, written in a mountain dialect, but bearing official seals that Marcus recognized as belonging to several neighboring kingdoms. Using his limited knowledge of various languages and careful examination of the symbols and numbers, Marcus was able to piece together fragments of meaning that painted a terrifying picture. The letter contained detailed information about troop movements, supply lines, and defensive positions throughout Valdoria. But more shocking was the revelation that Queen Isabel was not working alone. The letter referenced other assets within the royal court and mentioned coordination with agents in at least 3 neighboring kingdoms. This was not just espionage. It was preparation for a coordinated invasion. Even more disturbing were references to something called the final phase and mentions of specific dates that coincided with upcoming royal events. The military review that Queen Isabel would be attending was specifically mentioned, along with the autumn festival that would bring together nobles from across the kingdom. As Marcus studied the documents more carefully, he began to understand the true scope of the conspiracy. This was not a simple case of a spy gathering information. This was an elaborate, multi-year plan to completely destroy Valdoria from within. The mountain people, working with other kingdoms, had been systematically placing agents throughout Valdorian society, and Queen Isabel represented the culmination of their efforts, a spy positioned at the very heart of royal power. The most chilling discovery came in a personal letter addressed to Queen Isabel from someone identified only as the Shadow. The letter was written in the common tongue, making it fully accessible to Marcus, and its contents made his blood run cold. "My dear Isabel," the letter began, "your work has exceeded all expectations. The intelligence you have provided has allowed us to prepare for the final stage of our operation. The king's trust in you is complete, and soon that trust will be the instrument of his downfall. Remember, when the signal comes, you must be ready to act without hesitation. The life you have built, the affection you may have developed for your target, must all be set aside for the greater good of our cause. Valdoria will fall, and a new order will rise from its ashes." Marcus realized with growing horror that Queen Isabel was not just gathering intelligence. She was being positioned to assassinate King Edmund at a crucial moment. The loving wife was actually a trained killer, waiting for the right opportunity to strike down the man who shared her bed and trusted her with his life. The implications of this discovery forced Marcus to confront an even more disturbing possibility. If Queen Isabel had been willing to marry a man she intended to murder, if she was capable of maintaining such a complex deception for years, then what other aspects of her life might be fabricated? Had she engineered her entire background? Was Isabel Montclair even a real name? Driven by this new line of questioning, Marcus spent the following day researching everything he could find about the supposed Duke Aldrich Montclair of Rosehaven. What he discovered shattered the last of his assumptions about Queen Isabel's identity. Through careful examination of diplomatic records and trade documents, Marcus found several inconsistencies in Isabel's background story. The Duke Aldrich Montclair mentioned in her official biography had indeed existed, but he had died childless 15 years ago. There were no records of any daughters, and the estate had passed to a distant cousin who had no knowledge of anyone named Isabel. Furthermore, Marcus discovered that the woman who had married King Edmund had appeared in Rosehaven society only 6 months before the royal courtship began. Before that, there were no records of her existence anywhere in the official documents of any neighboring kingdom. The truth was becoming clear in its terrible simplicity. The woman known as Queen Isabel Montclair was a complete fabrication, a carefully constructed identity designed to infiltrate Valdorian society. Her entire life story, her noble background, her education, her supposed political connections, all of it was an elaborate lie designed to make her an acceptable bride for the king of Valdoria. This revelation raised new questions about the scope of the conspiracy. Creating such a convincing false identity would have required enormous resources and the cooperation of numerous individuals across multiple kingdoms. It suggested that the plot against Valdoria had been in development for many years, possibly even before King Edmund's first wife had died. The thought of Queen Catherine's death brought Marcus up short. The previous queen had died suddenly, of an illness that physicians had been unable to properly diagnose. At the time, it had been attributed to a weak constitution, but now Marcus wondered if there might have been a more sinister explanation. Had Queen Catherine been murdered to make way for the infiltration of Queen Isabel? As these thoughts swirled through his mind, Marcus realized that he was no longer investigating a simple case of espionage. He had uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that involved assassination, identity theft, and preparation for what appeared to be a coordinated military invasion. The woman sleeping in the royal quarters was not Queen Isabel Montclair. She was an unknown agent of Valdoria's enemies, and she was preparing to murder King Edmund. The weight of this knowledge was almost overwhelming. Marcus had always prided himself on his loyalty to the crown and his ability to protect the royal family from any threat. But now he faced a threat that came from within the royal family itself. The person he was sworn to protect was married to the very person who intended to kill him. Making matters worse was the realization that Marcus could not simply report his findings to his superiors. If the conspiracy was as extensive as the evidence suggested, there was no way to know who else might be compromised. Queen Isabel's letters had mentioned other assets within the royal court, which meant that some of the people Marcus worked with every day might themselves be enemy agents. The lonely guard found himself completely isolated with the most important secret in the kingdom's history. He alone knew that the queen consort was a false identity, that an assassination was being planned, and that a military invasion might be imminent. The fate of King Edmund, the survival of Aldoria, and the lives of thousands of innocent people now rested on his shoulders. As Marcus walked his patrol that night, every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every whispered conversation might be another piece of the conspiracy. He had uncovered the truth, but the truth had become a burden that threatened to crush him under its weight. Soon, he would have to act on what he knew, and when that moment came, there would be no turning back from the path that would either save the kingdom or lead to his own destruction. The faithful guard who had started this journey seeking to protect his king now found himself holding the power to prevent a catastrophe that would reshape the political landscape of the entire region. But with that power came the terrifying responsibility of deciding how and when to use it. Marcus Thornfield had reached the breaking point. For 3 weeks, he had carried the burden of knowledge that could destroy the kingdom, and the strain was beginning to show in ways that threatened to compromise his position. His hands shook during routine duties. He jumped at unexpected sounds, and his fellow guards had begun to whisper about his strange behavior. The situation became critical when Captain Reynolds pulled him aside after the morning briefing. "Thornfield, I'm going to ask you one more time. What the hell is wrong with you? You're acting like a man with a guilty conscience. If you've done something that compromises your position here, you need to tell me now." Marcus met his captain's stern gaze, knowing that his next words would either maintain his cover or destroy it entirely. "Captain, if I told you that I had discovered evidence of treason at the highest levels of the royal court, would you believe me?" Reynolds's expression shifted from irritation to alarm. "That's not a question a man asks lightly. Thornfield, are you telling me you've actually discovered something, or are you losing your mind from too many night shifts?" The moment of truth had arrived. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. "Captain, I need to show you something. But once I do, both our lives will be in danger. Are you prepared for that?" Reynolds studied Marcus's face for a long moment, weighing the implications of what he was hearing. Finally, he nodded. "If there's a real threat to the crown, it's our duty to act. Show me what you found." That evening, Marcus led Captain Reynolds to Queen Isabel's chambers during another royal feast. Using his knowledge of the Queen's routines and the location of her hidden compartment, he revealed the cache of documents and letters that proved her true identity and purpose. Reynolds examined each piece of evidence with the methodical attention of a career military man. As the implications became clear, his face grew pale and his jaw tightened. When he finished reading the letter from the shadow that outlined the assassination plot, he looked at Marcus with a mixture of respect and fear. "God's blood," Reynolds whispered. "This is worse than treason. This is impossible. How could someone maintain such a deception for so long? How could our intelligence services miss something this elaborate?" "Because it's been planned for years," Marcus replied. "Maybe even decades. And if the letters are accurate, there are others like her throughout the kingdom. We don't know who we could trust." Reynolds was quiet for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what they had discovered. Finally, he spoke with the authority of a man making the most important decision of his career. "We have to warn the king. I don't care how incredible this sounds. Edmund needs to know that his life is in immediate danger." "How?" Marcus asked. "We can't simply request an audience and accuse the queen of being an assassin. And if there are other agents in the court, word of our discovery could reach them before we reach the king." Reynolds considered this problem carefully. "There's one person in the palace we can trust absolutely. Brother Thomas, the king's confessor. He's known Edmund since childhood, and his loyalty is beyond question. If we present our evidence to him, he can arrange a private meeting with the king." This plan offered hope, but it also represented an enormous risk. Once they revealed their discovery to Brother Thomas, there would be no way to withdraw the accusation. If they were wrong, or if their evidence was somehow flawed, they would be executed for treason. If they were right, but failed to prevent the assassination, the kingdom would fall into chaos. The next morning, Marcus and Reynolds approached Brother Thomas in his private chapel. The elderly monk listened in stunned silence as they presented their evidence and explained the conspiracy they had uncovered. When they finished, Brother Thomas sat quietly for several minutes, his weathered hands folded in prayer. "I have served this royal family for 30 years, he finally said. "I baptized King Edmund. I performed the funeral rites for Queen Catherine, and I blessed his marriage to Queen Isabel. What you're telling me challenges everything I believe about the woman I thought I knew." Brother Thomas examined the documents Marcus had discovered, paying particular attention to the letters written in the mountain dialect. "I spent several years as a missionary in the mountain regions," he said quietly. "I can read enough of this language to confirm your translations. These documents are genuine, and their contents are horrifying." The monk's confirmation removed any remaining doubt about the validity of their discoveries. Brother Thomas agreed to arrange a secret meeting with King Edmund, but he insisted on one crucial condition. Queen Isabel must not suspect that her cover had been blown. "If she realizes that we know the truth," Brother Thomas warned, "she may accelerate her plans. The military review is only 3 days away. If she intended to act during that event, she might attempt to assassinate the king earlier rather than risk exposure." The secret meeting was arranged for the following evening in Brother Thomas's private chambers. King Edmund was told only that urgent matters of royal security required immediate attention. As the appointed time approached, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like a physical force. King Edmund arrived exactly on time, accompanied only by his personal bodyguard, Sir William Ashford, who had served the royal family for over 20 years. The king's expression showed curiosity mixed with concern as he looked at the unusual gathering of his confessor, his guard captain, and a guard he recognized but rarely spoke with directly. "Brother Thomas, Captain Reynolds," the king said, taking a seat in the simple wooden chair offered to him. "What matter of security requires such secrecy that we must meet like conspirators in the night?" Brother Thomas gestured to Marcus. "Your Majesty, Guard Thornfield has made a discovery that threatens not only your life, but the security of the entire kingdom. The evidence he will present challenges everything we thought we knew about someone very close to you." King Edmund's expression grew serious as Marcus began to present his evidence. He started with the observation of the secret meetings, moved through his investigation of Queen Isabel's background, and finally revealed the documents that proved her true identity and purpose. As Marcus spoke, King Edmund's face went through a series of transformations: confusion, disbelief, anger, and, finally, a deep sadness that seemed to age him before their eyes. When Marcus finished by reading the letter that outlined the assassination plot, the king was silent for a long moment. "The woman I love," Edmund said quietly, "the woman who shares my bed, who knows my deepest thoughts, who comforts me when I doubt myself. You're telling me that she's an enemy agent sent to murder me?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. "And based on the timeline mentioned in the letters, the assassination attempt will likely occur during the military review." King Edmund stood and walked to the small window of Brother Thomas's chambers, looking out at the palace grounds where he had lived his entire life. "If what you've discovered is true, then everything about my marriage, my happiness, my future, all of it has been a lie." Sir William, who had remained silent during the presentation, finally spoke. "Your Majesty, the evidence appears to be conclusive. We must act to protect you and to prevent whatever larger plan is being implemented." The king turned back to face the group, and Marcus could see that the loving husband was being replaced by the decisive ruler that Valdoria needed. "What do you recommend?" Captain Reynolds stepped forward. "Sire, we must arrest Queen Isabel immediately and interrogate her to discover the full extent of the conspiracy. We should also postpone the military review and conduct a complete investigation of all court personnel." But King Edmund shook his head. "No, if we move too quickly, we may miss the opportunity to uncover the other agents mentioned in these letters. I propose a different approach." The king's plan was bold and dangerous. Rather than immediately arresting Queen Isabel, He would continue to act normally while Marcus and a select team of absolutely trusted guards secretly monitored all of her activities. The goal was to identify her contacts and discover the complete network of enemy agents before making any arrests. If she suspects that we know, King Edmund continued, she'll either flee or attempt the assassination immediately. But if we can maintain the deception for just a few more days, we might be able to capture the entire conspiracy. Marcus felt both admiration for the king's courage and terror at the thought of allowing the charade to continue. They would be playing an incredibly dangerous game, with King Edmund's life hanging in the balance while they tried to outmaneuver trained assassins and enemy agents. As the meeting concluded, King Edmund placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Guard Thornfield, your loyalty and courage have likely saved my life and our kingdom. I will not forget this service." But as Marcus left the meeting, he knew that the most dangerous phase of this crisis was just beginning. They now had to convince Queen Isabel that nothing had changed while secretly working to uncover her network and prevent an assassination. One mistake, one moment of suspicious behavior, could result in the king's death and the fall of Aldoria. The loyal guard who had begun this journey by observing a suspicious meeting had now become a key player in a deadly game of deception. The fate of the kingdom rested on his ability to help the king maintain a convincing performance while secretly preparing to confront the woman who intended to murder him. The 2 days following the secret meeting were the most tense of Marcus Thornfield's life. King Edmund's performance as the unknowing husband was masterful. He continued to treat Queen Isabel with apparent love and trust, shared meals with her, discussed state business, and even sought her advice on matters related to the upcoming military review. Marcus and his carefully selected team of guards maintained constant but discreet surveillance of Queen Isabel's activities. What they discovered in those final hours before the military review was both illuminating and terrifying. The Queen's secret meetings increased in frequency, with visits from 3 different unknown individuals over the course of 2 days. Using hidden positions and careful observation, Marcus was able to identify several members of what appeared to be a sophisticated spy network that had infiltrated various levels of Valdorian society. One visitor was a merchant who frequently supplied goods to the palace kitchens, a position that would give him access to the royal food supply and the ability to introduce poisons. Another was a young woman who worked as a seamstress for several noble families, allowing her to gather intelligence about political discussions and private conversations throughout the court. The third was most shocking of all, a junior clerk in the royal treasury who would have had access to detailed information about the kingdom's financial resources and military funding. The scope of the conspiracy was larger than any of them had imagined. This was not simply a matter of one embedded assassin, but a comprehensive intelligence operation that had been gathering information and positioning assets for what appeared to be years. Brother Thomas, using his connections throughout the kingdom, was able to trace some of the identified conspirators back to their origins. What he discovered confirmed their worst fears. Several neighboring kingdoms had indeed coordinated this operation, with the mountain people serving as the primary organizers and intelligence coordinators. The plan, as it became clear through intercepted communications and careful observation, was devastatingly simple in its effectiveness. Queen Isabel would assassinate King Edmund during the military review, creating immediate chaos and confusion. In the aftermath, with the kingdom leaderless and the military command structure disrupted, coordinated attacks would be launched from 3 different directions by armies that had been secretly positioned over the previous months. Valdoria would fall not through a conventional siege or military defeat, but through the surgical removal of its leadership followed by overwhelming force applied to a kingdom already in turmoil. The wealth of Valdoria's mining operations, the strategic value of its trade routes, and the fertile agricultural lands would be divided among the conquering kingdoms. As the day of the military review arrived, Marcus felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment. King Edmund would be exposed and vulnerable during the ceremony, surrounded by hundreds of soldiers and officials, any of whom might be part of the conspiracy. Queen Isabel would have multiple opportunities to strike, and the chaos that would follow a successful assassination would make it nearly impossible to maintain order. The plan they had developed to counter this threat was complex and dangerous. King Edmund would attend the military review as scheduled, but with several crucial modifications. Sir William would be positioned close enough to intervene if Queen Isabel attempted to attack the king directly. Marcus and his team would monitor all known conspirators, ready to arrest them simultaneously if the situation deteriorated. Most importantly, they had arranged for a special signal that would alert loyal guards throughout the ceremony if immediate action became necessary. Brother Thomas had also taken the precaution of preparing secret messages to be sent to allied kingdoms if the worst occurred. If King Edmund was assassinated despite their preparations, at least some warning of the impending invasion might reach potential allies. The military review began with all the pageantry and ceremony befitting such an important state occasion. King Edmund, resplendent in his ceremonial armor, reviewed the troops accompanied by Queen Isabel, who appeared every inch the devoted consort. To outside observers, the royal couple seemed perfectly normal, showing no signs of the deadly drama playing out beneath the surface. Marcus maintained his position in the honor guard, close enough to observe Queen Isabel's every movement while scanning the crowd for any signs of unusual activity from the known conspirators. The tension was almost unbearable as he watched the woman he knew to be an assassin walking arm in arm with the king, smiling and waving to the assembled soldiers. The moment of crisis came during the formal inspection of the elite cavalry units. As King Edmund approached the mounted officers to receive their salute, Marcus noticed Queen Isabel's hand moving toward a small decorative pin on her dress. His heart stopped as he realized that this innocent-looking ornament was likely the weapon she intended to use. At the same moment, Marcus observed several of the identified conspirators moving to positions that would allow them to create confusion and block escape routes if the assassination succeeded. The merchant who supplied the palace kitchens was positioning himself near the platform where musicians were playing. The seamstress had somehow gained access to the area where noble families were seated. The treasury clerk was standing with a group of minor officials, all of whom seemed unusually tense. Everything was falling into place for the conspiracy's final act. Queen Isabel was in perfect position to strike. Her fellow agents were ready to create chaos, and King Edmund was focused on the military ceremony, apparently unaware of the danger surrounding him. Marcus made a split-second decision that would determine the fate of the kingdom. Rather than waiting for Queen Isabel to act, he chose to expose the conspiracy immediately, even though it meant abandoning their plan to gather more evidence about the full network. "Protect the king," Marcus shouted, drawing his sword and pointing it directly at Queen Isabel. "The queen is an assassin." The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Queen Isabel's facade dropped instantly, her loving expression replaced by cold determination as she produced what appeared to be a small, deadly blade from her decorative pin. But Sir William was ready, tackling her to the ground before she could strike. Simultaneously, Marcus's team moved to arrest the identified conspirators. The merchant tried to flee, but was tackled by guards before he could escape. The seamstress produced a hidden crossbow, but was disarmed before she could use it. The treasury clerk attempted to draw a concealed weapon, but was overwhelmed by Sir William's men. King Edmund, despite the shock of seeing his wife revealed as an enemy agent, maintained enough composure to address the assembled troops. "Soldiers of Valdoria," he called out in a voice that carried across the entire gathering, "we have uncovered and defeated a conspiracy against our kingdom. Your loyalty and vigilance have preserved our realm from those who would destroy us." The aftermath of the confrontation revealed the true scope of what they had prevented. Under interrogation, Queen Isabel, whose real name was revealed to be Lyanna Blackthorn, a trained assassin from the mountain clans, provided information about invasion forces that were already positioned at Valdoria's borders, waiting for the signal that the assassination had succeeded. King Edmund's survival and the exposure of the conspiracy allowed Valdoria to mobilize its defenses and alert allied kingdoms to the threat. The coordinated invasion was defeated before it could fully begin, and several neighboring kingdoms found themselves facing diplomatic consequences for their involvement in the plot. The trials that followed revealed a conspiracy that stretched back over 5 years and involved dozens of individuals across multiple kingdoms. The false Queen Isabel had indeed been responsible for the death of Queen Catherine, using a slow-acting poison that mimicked natural illness. Her marriage to King Edmund had been the culmination of a long-term plan to place an assassin at the very heart of Valdoria's power structure. Marcus Thornfield was honored by King Edmund with elevation to the nobility and appointment as the head of a new royal intelligence service designed to prevent such infiltrations in the future. His vigilance and courage had not only saved the king's life, but had preserved the independence of the entire kingdom. As he stood in the great hall during the ceremony, recognizing his service, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. A simple observation during a routine patrol had led to the discovery of the most sophisticated conspiracy in the kingdom's history. His loyalty to the crown and his willingness to investigate suspicious activity had prevented a catastrophe that would have reshaped the political landscape of the entire region. King Edmund, still bearing the emotional scars of learning that his marriage had been a complete deception, spoke to Marcus after the ceremony. "You gave me back my kingdom and my life," the king said. "But perhaps more importantly, you showed me that there are still people whose loyalty is absolute and whose courage is unshakable. That knowledge will help me rebuild the trust that was so cruelly betrayed." Marcus accepted the king's gratitude, but he knew that his real reward was simpler and more profound. He had fulfilled his oath to protect the crown, and in doing so, he had discovered that sometimes the greatest loyalty requires the courage to question everything, even when the truth seems impossible to believe. The kingdom of Aldoria survived its greatest internal threat, stronger and more vigilant than before. And Marcus Thornfield, the guard who had trusted his instincts and followed the evidence wherever it led, had earned his place in the history of a realm that owed its continued existence to one man's unwavering dedication to duty and truth. The faithful guard had become the savior of a kingdom, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary acts of heroism begin with the simple decision to pay attention to what others might ignore.